Contrary to popular belief, there are plenty of terrifying horror titles where nobody bites the dust. Excessively killing off characters is only one facet of the genre that keeps audiences frightened, but there's plenty more that gets pulses racing. Filmmakers have fantastic tools like atmosphere, pacing, acting, visuals, and more at their disposal to make you quiver with fear. And one subgenre that excels in this is the supernatural, where spirits and the like haunt the everyday. So with that in mind, I'm Ellie with What Culture, here with 10 supernatural horror movies where nobody dies. Number 10, The Conjuring. The Conjuring is one of the most influential horror movies of the modern era, and one of the scariest supernatural flicks ever made. However, not a single character shuffles off their mortal coil in it. Shocking, right? For those unaware, the film follows the supposedly true work of the legendary paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren. The runtime is filled with creepy antics as the couple protects an unlucky family from the terrifying supernatural force haunting their home. Now, with a whopping 7 members, this family provides a lot of folks to kill off, with the Warrens added as potential cannon fodder on top. And despite this, the only characters who die are Sadie the dog and a bunch of pigeons. There are some other deaths, but none of them happen in the film's runtime. This lets the movie have its cake and eat it by exploring the themes of death without actually having to inflict it on any of the cast members. It's a win-win. Oh, and if you want a bonus entry, The Conjuring 2 also has no deaths. Number 9, The Gate. You've gotta love 80s kids horror movies. They traumatize youngsters in a way that helped shape a generation of horror lovers, and The Gate is a fine example of it. Still, while the film definitely freaked people out, it ultimately turned out alright for everyone involved. This cult classic is a delightful movie about some youngsters who accidentally release a horde of demons into their home. Oh, everyone's been there, right? Naturally, having a bunch of monsters roaming about seems like a recipe for bloodshed, but while they are terrifying, they don't manage to kill anyone. The film does have some victims, including Angus the dog and a construction worker. However, the former gets revived by the end, and the latter dies years before the events of the flick. Ultimately, the movie's PG-13 rating and lack of death doesn't give it an excuse to skimp on the scares. It's a freaky movie that packs a punch thanks to its charming visual effects, creepy monsters, and sense of danger. Number 8, The Babadook. The essence of The Babadook is the story of a mother on the verge of killing her child. As such, it's about the furthest you'll ever get to having bloodlust in a horror movie. Seeing Jason or Freddy tearing up unsuspecting teens in their films may be exhilarating, but nobody was rooting for death in this particular film. Jennifer Kent's modern horror classic pits the titular monster, Mr. Babadook, against a grieving mother and her child. It explores deeply intimate horror as this terrifying creature uses Amelia's grief to drive her to madness and set her on a path of infanticide. Those who have seen the film will know that Amelia's son is a handful. That said, he's still an innocent kid who quickly gets you on his side despite his behavioural troubles, making the whole threat of the movie incredibly distressing. Thankfully, you won't need to worry about him or anyone else, as no one is 6 feet under by the time the credits roll on this Australian horror masterpiece. Number 7, Allelujah, The Devil's Carnival. So this movie comes in with an unfair advantage, as technically all the folk in it are dead. You can't kill someone if they're already in heaven or hell, so it kind of wins by default. Still, even with that clear absence of death in place, it's still very much lacking in its kill count. This niche horror musical is a twisted take on the afterlife. It follows the tensions between heaven and hell as Lucifer plans an invasion complete with toe-tapping song numbers. Given the focus on hell, you would think that there would be suffering abound, but the flick is surprisingly tame. This is especially shocking given the gruesome body count in the creator's previous project, Repo, the Genetic Opera. There are some people who get damned from heaven to hell, but nobody gets outright killed, as the film simply explores what happens to characters who have already met their ends. If you like musicals and scary things, then give this one a go. Number 6, If you've yet to watch 2022's but love a good dose of metaphorical horror with a great leading performance and interesting cultural roots, then you should check it out. But don't go in expecting to see anyone bite the bullet because it doesn't even come close. Amma tells the story of a woman attempting to heal from her traumatic childhood. Amanda, played by the ever-reliable Sandra Oh, had a tumultuous relationship with her now-deceased mother, or Amma. This comes to a head as her farm experiences supernatural events after receiving her dead mother's ashes. The film certainly packs a punch and does see some death here and there. However, while some chickens get chomped down on by a nine-tailed fox, you won't find any human fatalities outside the titular mother, who passes off-screen before the narrative even begins. As far as effective horror flicks go, this one does a solid job. It's a thoughtful exploration of generational trauma, has compelling ties to Korean heritage and cultures, and Sandra Oh acts her butt off in the lead. Number 5. The Others. Now, those of you who haven't seen this film might question whether it deserves a place here, but it absolutely does, even if via technicality. The Others is a stylish, macabre, and incredibly gripping supernatural horror that subverts the classic haunted house trope. It follows a woman named Grace and her children as their home is invaded by spirits. Come to the end, however, you learn that most of the characters have already perished, with the servants dead thanks to tuberculosis, and Grace having killed her children and then herself. Now, hearing that the characters have been dead the whole time would imply that the movie has a body count, but seeing as they've already passed before the film starts, it absolutely still counts as a movie that no one dies in. The whole story centres on death and grief, yet you won't see anyone physically cross that threshold. Number 4. Poltergeist. Time for another beloved classic so scary and iconic that you likely never realised it was missing a visit from the Grim Reaper. Poltergeist is a supernatural movie to the max that throws plenty of threats at the characters. The Freeling family go through hell as their house is haunted by demonic spirits, leading to battles with possessed trees, skeletons, and a clown toy with a penchant for strangulation. Yet, the family make it out the other side still breathing. Interestingly, this low body count spans across the whole franchise, as the sequels and also remake stray away from filling up cemeteries. In fact, Poltergeist 3 is the only film in the series to feature deaths as a direct result of the supernatural hijinks. Number 3. The Amityville Horror. Now, the crux of the Amityville Horror, both the remake and the original, is that death is the catalyst for everything. Hell, a deranged man killing his entire family is what kicks the story off. However, while that focus on death is the foundation of the film, it's not a theme that sticks around. This mostly solid remake sees a family suffer as they experience the quintessential haunted house experience, with run-ins from ghostly figures and a father slowly losing his grip on sanity. But as should be clear by now, this all ultimately comes to nothing. The movie is another example of a horror that deals with plenty of death without dishing it out. The house itself is built on a site of mass Native American torture, meaning death is soaked into the very structure. Yet you only see this through the apparitions Ryan Reynolds' George encounters. Sure, you see some death here and there, but it's all stuff from the past, leaving the kill count surprisingly clean. Number 2. The Entity. Being stalked by an entity that ultimately tries to kill you is the kind of nightmare most can agree sounds hellish. But there are some fates that might be even worse, and the hero of this story endures one of those. This early 80s supernatural horror follows a woman by the name of Carla who is tormented, stalked, and continually sexually assaulted by an invisible entity. She tries desperately to get those around her to believe her plight, but it falls on unsympathetic ears. Obviously, this leads to a host of frustration alongside the terror, but what makes it all the more haunting is that the entity has no desire to kill Carla, only to torture and molest her. It doesn't even go for anyone else, just her. No one dies, yet you get no respite. Overall, it's an abhorrent yet powerful experience. Never before has a movie with such little threat of death made you so terrified for the protagonist. Number 1. Annabelle Comes Home. Annabelle Comes Home is the third Annabelle film and the 6th movie in the Conjuring franchise. It should come as no surprise that the flick follows the exploits of the titular haunted doll as they torment a selection of victims, this time being a babysitter who unwittingly unleashes the monster in the Warrens' own home. The Annabelle movies have taken lives before, but like the first 2 Conjuring films, this installment sticks to scares outside of blood and gore. The young victims of this devilish spirit manage to come out the other end unscathed, even without Ed and Lorraine's presence for most of the runtime. Conjuring spin-off movies aren't always the most impressive flicks, but this title does a great job of bringing some high-octane scares without relying on death and destruction.